So we now have an opportunity to ask the two participants questions. And David Barnes from the team. So David has been extensively travelling over the last 18 months looking at other schemes as well. So we do have that as a background in terms of the more technical aspects from other successful schemes as well. So open up. Who's going to be first?
Very comforted to hear in the last slide there that the consultation with the glass industry will continue. I'm very keen to understand what that actually encompasses. Want to make a couple of points before we start. The glass industry is in a position where historically it's always viewed post-consumer materials as a very valuable resource. So we were first out there with bottle banks and we persist with that. We are concerned that the way that this plays out, we are passengers in a scheme that's designed to rectify problems with other materials. And we've had consequential damage through that sort of process before, and we've had to fight to rectify it. We find ourselves displaced in terms of material by weight when certain initiatives were put in place. Curbside collections were forced upon us when we had bottle banks, and we've rallied to try and recover every precious piece of glass that we can get from post-consumer as we would as an industry, because it makes perfect sense for us to do that. There's CO2 value in not using raw materials. There's a cost enhancement for us melting already melted glass rather than using...
Question? You have a question?
So the question is really, I think from my understanding, your advisory group had pushed for a little bit more time and inclusion of the debate around glass rather than haste in delivering a scheme. What I really want to understand is what will be involved in that process, and is there still an opportunity for glass as a material that recognises the value of recovering post-consumer, not to be drawn into a scheme that's designed to rectify a plastics or a litter problem which we're not really part of.
Okay, Don, do you want to answer that? Or?
Sure. So the idea that there's not a problem with glass is not one that I would agree with. We are currently collecting something of the order of 64% of glass, recycling 64%. I think your numbers are 67%, ours are 64%. We can argue about the 3%, but DRS will get us up to 85 plus, hopefully 90% for glass. So there is a big benefit from introducing DRS for glass. Whether glass is in or out of DRS, you're going to end up paying a lot more through producer responsibility anyway. I'm not sure the industry has yet understood the scale of the change that is coming under producer responsibility and how much more you are going to end up paying through that scheme if you are outside DRS. We believe that the most effective way of avoiding skewing the market between materials is to have as comprehensive a system as possible. We think that is the most likely way to avoid skewing the market for materials. And for all those reasons, you heard the CabSec this morning make a strong commitment to having glass in the scheme. So the government's position is very much that glass is in. We're happy to show you our numbers, compare the numbers, go through the different aspects, work out how best to make it work within the scheme. And we expect, as the CabSec said this morning, quite a debate around glass when it gets into the parliamentary process, which is where we think this will move. That said, the CabSec also said that the political reaction to our announcement was very supportive. There was no big political bite back on the inclusion of glass in the scheme to our announcement. So all the signs are, to me, that glass will be in.
We've been very vocal about impact on retail, which I'm sure you understand, about the limited space in store, the hygiene issues, the pressures on staff, which is actually going to be exacerbated if there's manual handling as well. But the question I wanted to ask, because there's been that work on how much coverage you could get with return points, and the 17% figure if there's an exemption for small shops. I was wondering if there had, rather than obligating every retail outlet in Scotland, if there had been any work about strategically mapping not just points of purchase being return points, but also points of consumption and points of disposal, and looking at whether there's access criteria where you can look at other services that have the same thing like ATMs and National Lottery, whether that could actually minimise the impact on retailers while also having a really effective DRS scheme, because you can find where those locations with the highest footfall are.
Okay, that's a very interesting question. I think we know the answer to that. I'm going to look at Jill or David.
Yeah, I mean, we have done some work. I'll ask David to follow up on this. We have done some work looking at exactly the kind of access points that you're talking about. And we have a model that we've shared, and we're very happy to share more widely and have that tested. Collecting the data to inform that model has been one of the biggest challenges. At the moment, as the Cabinet Secretary said, it looks like very quickly when you start introducing blanket exemptions, coverage falls off a cliff, and the absolute commitment is to make sure that it's as easy to return a bottle in Stornoway as it is in Glasgow. So we need to make sure that this is accessible geographically and in terms of people's physical or financial ability to get to those return points, which is why if it's easy to buy it, it should be easy to return it. Basis is what we're working on, but David, you've done a lot more work in that. Do you want to add to that?
So I mean, I don't have a great more deal to add. I think that's the key point, is that if it's easy to buy it, if you're able to buy a container from a particular location, then hopefully it makes intuitive sense to everyone in the audience today that it should be easy for people to then return the empty container. I think in terms of the concerns that small retailers have, I think what I would be keen to say is that as we enter the next stage, it's the perfect opportunity to address this. What actually makes participating in a deposit return scheme simple, as Ian mentioned, we've been to numerous schemes abroad, is how the scheme administrator, how the organisation that's providing this service meets the needs of different types of retailers. And for large retailers, that might well be that they allow them to backhaul the material to their own distribution centres so that it can align with their own collection frequencies, so that they can benefit from logistics contracts as well as a physical handling fee. For small retailers, it's about ensuring that the collection frequency is enough that people aren't having to store a disproportionate amount of bags. So actually, this next phase, as we enter this implementation planning cycle, is the key opportunity to influence, to make sure that everyone can participate and we can deliver that equality of service, but actually it's not disproportionate for all of your members.
Just to clarify with Dawn about EPR and DRS and not paying the same item twice, I just want to kind of get clarity on that there'll be an assurance that we don't pay EPR and then on the same material we'll pay again for DRS.
So the objective is absolutely that if you are paying a producer responsibility fee through DRS and that material is collected through DRS, you will not pay a producer responsibility fee for that item. Okay,
thank you. And then if I may have a follow-up quickly for Jill, and on the timing, and the timetable, it said Q3 for the legislation to be adopted in Parliament. That's not very far away. Can you give us a wee bit more detail on the timetable there? Because obviously the parliamentary process was flagged as a key moment by the Cabinet Secretary for us to make any representations. So I'd just like to understand better.
I'm delighted to say that Don's team are in charge of the legislation side of things.
That's my bit of the business. It's a super affirmative process, as the CabSec alluded to earlier. So our aim will be to lay the regulations in early summer, most likely July. There's a mandatory 90-day period that the regulations have to sit in draft in Parliament. Our expectation is that the Parliament will seek to take evidence, call for evidence in one way or another as part of that process, and will feedback some thoughts and some comments to the government, and then the process is that the government has to lay a final set of regulations which that will then have to be voted on by the Parliament. So the whole process takes about 5 or 6 months, is our estimate. So it will sort of kick off in July and should finish by around the turn of the year if it goes as planned.
What's the best way for organisations like social enterprises to get involved at this stage in discussions around opportunities to be involved in backhauling, for example? Because I don't think they're represented on the implementation advisory group, but I know that there are lots of people who would be interested in getting involved in that process.
Jill?
So we're developing these work packages, and as I say, it's predominantly the member companies of the Implementation Advisory Group membership organisations. We would be open to having those conversations, definitely, about how we look at how social enterprises and others could be involved. As I say, we haven't involved waste management companies in the Implementation Advisory Group because they could be beneficiaries of contracts that come out of those conversations, so that wouldn't be fair or appropriate. So on the same basis, we couldn't give unfair advantage to, but very happy. An offer would be if there's any events that you're holding, if there's any meetings that you're having that you think it would be useful to have someone from the wider deposit return scheme family, so Scottish Government, SEPA or Zero Waste Scotland, come and talk through next steps and what we're doing. We'd be more than happy to do that.
One of the big challenges here is that there are literally thousands of people touched by the changes we're talking here. Trying to get them all in the room is not a feasible exercise. We are having to work to some extent through representative organisations. It's just the reality of the numbers involved. But as Jill says, there's something about maybe a bit of kind of outreach for folks that are interested, or some bigger events once we're a little bit further down the road and have more of the detail filled in for folks. Then that should definitely be part of the picture.
Yeah, I'd echo that as well. I mean, obviously, when I get asked at various events, not just in Scotland and the UK as well, about the work that Zero Waste Scotland been involved in, and what is it, the kind of single take-home message from all of this is the sheer size of the stakeholder engagement exercise. I think anybody who's thinking about doing a deposit system should not underestimate that is constantly, and getting everybody together and keep people involved has been a considerable undertaking. So yeah, that is something that we will continue to do, obviously, at Zero Waste Scotland and government as well. So, but it is just making sure everybody that has been touched by that programme going forward has the chance to interact with what's going on is usually challenging, but it's something we're all committed to continue to do.
I think the key to success of this scheme will be consumer participation. Yet the consultation process to date, as far as I've understood it from your 151 pages, has been to engage with 2,000 consumers from a population of 5 million. So my question is, are there any plans to broaden and deepen that consumer outreach, in particular to validate the likelihood of participation and to test that 90% return rate? And I think this is especially important for materials like glass, where consumers will be faced with the burden of recycling their empty packaging via a number of separate channels. So, for example, a glass bottle will go in a DRS and a food jar, olive oil jar, will go in some other scheme. Thank you.
Yeah, so obviously the government has done a consultation. We haven't done any kind of direct opinion polling of kind of consumers, but other organisations have. And what those opinion polls by third parties have found is exceptionally strong public support for A, the scheme, and B, the inclusion of glass. So I'm not in any doubt based on the information I've seen. Nobody has produced any counter information to that I have seen that gives me any cause for doubt of what I've seen through that kind of information. Obviously, there will be a huge exercise required to communicate the scheme to consumers. Jill?
Yeah, so as I said, we have been planning a lot more consumer communications, consumer-facing communications, probably further down the programme plan, but as a consequence of some of the conversations we've had today and yesterday and last night, in fact, at the Parliament, it's clear that there's still a lot of people out there who don't know what a deposit return scheme is, don't know what's in, what's not in scope. So, as I say, it's only 2 weeks ago that the scheme was announced. We will start to build more consumer-facing campaigns with our partners to raise awareness of that. That may be the stage at which some people stop and say, oh, hold on a minute, we didn't realise that's what you meant. But as Dawn said, not that I do, but if you open the Daily Mail, one of the highest selling papers in the UK, their readership is highly supportive of a deposit return scheme that in some cases we're being criticised for not being broad enough, either in terms of the materials in scope or the scale of our ambition. So the mood music from the general public very much seems to be in support of this. And what we will absolutely make a commitment to do is increase our consumer-facing communications in this in the short term.
I mean, the other thing drawn here is the experience of other countries where a number of the more recently established DRS schemes around the world do include glass, and they're performing at 85% plus, most of them, approaching 90% for some.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mo.
NFRN supported this from March 2017, so we've been on board for a while now. The thing I would also ask is that the UK Scottish market is very competitive. What that means is we've got more price marked products, and profit margins for a business are less. So when you're adding, I'm comparing this to Finland, Estonia, Norway and Sweden. And when you're adding glass into the system, that's going to be problematic for us. And the reason for that is the reverse vending machine is going to cost more because of the additional material. Also, there's more work involved in handling. So the handling fee is going to be crucial for the smaller retailer. And so it's already been pointed out that stores are fairly small. So and the concern's going to be is how to make this cost neutral, and we feel that the handling fee needs to be equitable for all, just so that we make it viable as well. The other quick question would be, Rosanna spoke about the milk bottles and how they're not going to be part of the scheme, but there's also, for instance, soft drinks companies such as Dunn Soft Drinks and Springwell, Blantyre, that also have a deposit of 30 pence on the bottles. Would they be exempt from it?
Good question. Okay, maybe I don't know if you want to answer that, but the handling fees, you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, so the part of the retailers being on the implementation advisory group is to strike that balance between the producer fee and the handling fee. And David, do you want to talk about this? You've got more experience of.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the key thing to remember around about retailer involvement is about having that different options to facilitate that return. What I would say is that in terms of the modelling we've done, we've looked at the different types of reverse vending machines that you need, the different ways that you can facilitate it through manual take back. Absolutely, the machines that take glass are more expensive than machines that don't take glass. But by the same token, actually to make a reverse vending machine a valued asset for any business, you need a certain throughput of containers to go through it in order that is paid back in a reasonable amount of time. So all of these issues are things that need to be considered, and what I think part of the implementation advisory group will be absolutely vital at doing is providing the type of guidance, not only in helping to develop what that handling fee is ultimately for different types of return methods, but actually providing guidance to businesses so that they can understand what the right decision is for them. So looking at what is the turn point in terms of number of containers per week for you to invest in a reverse vending machine. What is the best solution for a manual return? How can that be accommodated in terms of collection frequency? These are all things that the scheme administrator will determine. And that's the reason why, going back to the scheme announcement and what the Cabinet Secretary said, having an industry-led scheme allows the flexibility of this range of solutions to be deployed, meaning that actually people should benefit from being involved.
And as I said earlier, one of the things we're looking at as part of the establishment of the scheme administrator over the next 3 months is funding models. So we'll look at both funding for the scheme administrator, but reverse vending machines for retailers of any size.
And on the return for reuse, return for refill point, there are countries in the world where return for a DRS for recycling sits alongside a return for refill scheme. I used to live in Germany where some of that operates. So the two things can operate alongside each other. In Scotland, since the bars return for refill scheme was stopped, then the the amount of the market that's covered by return for refill at the moment is tiny. So anything we do there isn't going to really affect the overall objectives here, but we don't really want to interfere with the existing return for refill schemes if we can avoid it.
As an RVM producer, but also someone that is a partner to many of the banks in the UK with a good understanding of financial services, our question really is around the payment system, and if this is going to be a forward-thinking scheme where we allow things like contactless return or mobile app payment options, what consideration has been given to the back-of-house processing to be able to do that? Settlement, reconciliation, that kind of thing, because it's almost a scheme in itself, I guess.
Absolutely. I mean, so the scheme administrator is at its heart a big financial management company and a logistics company. So there's a work stream that's looking at data and ICT requirements, and that's exactly where the focus will be. What's the scale and nature of the ICT systems that are required, both from a logistics and from a lots of small amounts of cash handling perspective?
The CABSEC was asked in the context of our parliamentary statement about, is there going to be an app? She seemed enthusiastic without really knowing the detail of it. But the bottom line is that we want a scheme that's as accessible and as user-friendly as possible for consumers. So ultimately, these will be decisions for the system administrator, but certainly from a government perspective, we will be encouraging the people involved in the system administrator to make the system as easy and accessible and use as much use of kind of technology as it can.
And of course, Scotland is famous internationally as being a centre of excellence for financial services, ICT services. So we hope to build on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I'm very conscious there's lots more questions, but it is just due to the accessibility of the building and getting it together, bringing it to a close, but there is obviously still an opportunity over lunch for networking and to ask not just the three people up front, but the wider Zero Waste Scotland team and government team who are here today. Hopefully everybody knows who they are. They've had an opportunity over the last 18 months to interact with both Zero Waste Scotland and the government. I would absolutely encourage you to continue that. If that's okay, I think it's probably my duty just to remind those of you that we have quite an extensive, as well as these events, we've been engaging with all of you for some time as Zero Waste Scotland through a stakeholder newsletter, stakeholder information on our website. We've now developed a specific hub on our website, expression hub, on our website, which will continually be updated on frequently asked questions. More details become apparent, the conversations that we're having. So even the questions that have been asked today will be used to kind of review that on an ongoing basis. So that is the place for us in Scotland to really make sure we have the most up-to-date information, and we're pushing that out to all the stakeholders. So if you haven't signed up to the newsletter or the email alerts, then please contact the Zero Waste Scotland, and we'll do that. This is, as I said, it is just part and parcel of this engagement exercise. So as well as the event today, we will continue to engage through the next few months ahead and years ahead as the implementation starts to really gear up. So in summing up, we heard from the CABSEC, and obviously listening to why we're doing the deposit system, the importance of it, we've known that, and obviously talked a lot about climate change and the fact that all of that is now very, very much being geared up, and the deposit system is part and parcel of our actions, not just here in Scotland but around the world, in tackling such a serious issue, and not just about plastics, but it's about the wider climate change action that's required. Another aspect, and it's something that I always reflect on, it's being talked about in terms of the quality of the materials, and we take the point seriously about glass in terms of being a valuable product, and other materials as well, but how we can really realise that here in Scotland for economic opportunities, as Don said, in terms of a circular economy. My journey with the deposit system started, for those of you who have been around over the last 10 years, one of my first jobs at Zero Waste Scotland was to try and attract plastic reprocessing capacity into Scotland. And we had £5 million to spend. We had £5 million to commit to a project. And we were unsuccessful at that. And the reasons we were unsuccessful was really about with every respect, the fragmentation of our collection system, 32, 64 authorities, 19 waste management companies all involved in it. But that was something that could have been overcome. But the quality of our plastics that was being produced was of no attraction to anybody for that investment. And I know when I went to South Australia about 8 years ago and saw their system, when you saw the bales of plastic that looked pristine, you know, from their handling system there, you started to understand that's what we could be doing in Scotland. If we could generate that quality of plastics, we could really seize the opportunity in terms of reprocessing. So that, again, you know, adds to that economic story in terms of the circular economy and how important the deposit system can be for generating those opportunities. Another reflection on this is transformative. I think Jill's talking about that. This is a transformative, a game changer of a scheme that's going to come up and really absolutely change the way that all of us consumers think about bottles and cans, etc., going forward, and it is going to be transformative. So, as the CABSEC said, we're not underestimating the challenge that is in terms of changing a system or introducing a new system, but also engaging with the public. But we have to reflect on, we've done this before. I've been involved in the establishment of the waste regulations in 2012, particularly around food waste. So not just getting consumers to use food waste caddies at home, but actually all businesses in Scotland being obligated under food waste. And I know the challenges that was at the time, both logistically and behavioural change, but we did it, and we've done it successfully. And at the time, it was world-leading legislation. So again, it's something that Scotland should be rightly proud of, that we can overcome these real big challenges and introduce transformative schemes that really make a difference. But as everybody said, and that's the important thing, the important message really to finish, we are entering a new phase. And I say that from a Zero Waste Scotland's point of view, where we've been doing a lot of this modelling, a lot of interaction with people. But now the new phase really, really depends a lot on that relationship with yourselves, the stakeholders, the producers, the retailers, the local authorities who are going to implement the scheme, and getting them on board to help shape not just the implementation programme, but the final details of the scheme and how it operates, how it's financed, how the app is developed, all of that. That is the critical change to some extent in terms of this project going forward. So having that relationship with both the IAG group but wider stakeholder involvement is absolutely crucial to success. So please keep engaged. Please don't be shy. Don't wait for the next event. Through the website, through interactions with both my team and government, we are open to that dialogue. It is very critical that we remain engaged with everybody. So it's really just my final words to just thank everybody for coming. I know it was short notice again, and the inconvenience perhaps of that, but very important event, get CABSEC earlier today. The panel for addressing, both presenting but also answering the questions, and you'll be available obviously for other questions over lunch and beyond. I would echo Don's remarks. We've only been allowed to stay here till 2 o'clock, so if you want to continue conversations after 2 o'clock, yes, a walking meeting through the Botanics. I would absolutely, I think it's a fantastic space if you've never been here before. If you want to go and see giant redwood trees, there's a stand of them in the far corner, which is just fantastic. So this is a great space. And I look forward to seeing you all again and keeping on with the engagement. But thank you very much.